very renowned Hungarian scholar here in Taiwan. I came across his name at the Socialist University. I happen to know someone in Socialist and learned Professor Zabo had been the visitor at the Socialist. And a very, very important intellectual, a symbol of a Hungarian civilization to this part of the world.
At least the teacher of her, the consul of Hungary.
Yes. Next to is Professor Shi. Professor Shi is another household name. He plays basketball.
Co-sponsors.
A co-sponsor of today's event. And I'm sharing with you that he not only studied, but also he exercised extensively, swim and play basketball. Still playing, yes. And the next to him is another representative from, intellectual representative, ambassador from Russia, Pavlov, who is a frequent visitor to this part of the world. He studied once at the Budapest. Yes. And he teaches also at Beijing. So the purpose again of our joint engagement today is to exchange notes about what has been learned from one another. But that's the very role played not only by the intellectual professors, also by practitioners. We have a deputy representative from the Hungary office. She joined us as the observer to check whether scholars are doing the right thing. On our side, Professor Tang, who is another important figure, who travel to China twice a month. Not anymore. Not anymore. Along with the yes, he's also the chair of Monet.
John Monet.
John Monet.
John Monet.
Professor. This is something.
My new title.
New title. All right. Appreciate your presence today. So the rule of the engagement today is you will have 20 minutes each to address on the the bilateral relations or multilateral relations with one another. You're free to address whatever you feel like, either on bilateral or multilateral. So we'll begin from Professor Zabo.
Thank you. Could we go on with the PPT?
Okay.
So you would like to use the PPT? Yes. Microphone? Do you need a microphone? Yeah.
Only here. Microphone.
That's right.
Great. Thank you so much for your kind invitation. Such a really distinguished company of established scholars and interested in the 60th anniversary of the revolution and of mine. I was born in 56, a little bit earlier, so my, let's say, unconscious, non-conscious experience will be a little bit discussed now, maybe. And I think the revolutions happening is not the subject of my lecture at all. I recently looked at the Wikipedia and I found a very good and well done English part. I think one of the historical institutes of Hungary has done it. Really reliable source, I would say, for a first sight. I would like only mention that this was an important anti-Stalinist protest, but of course part of a series of protests. 1953. Workers' protest in East Berlin and in East Germany. You remember the famous poem of Bertolt Brecht. You should cancel the people and not the Communist Party leadership. That's very rough translation of the very famous German words. Then 56 in Hungary, but preceding at the same year by Poland. Poland had much more protests after the Second World War, anti-democratization, than any of the other post-communist countries. The workers' protest waves were there until the very end. And practically the Hungarian Revolution started as a solidarity movement to the Gdansk people, to the workers' protest in Poland. But we should remember the very important change, the death of Stalin, 53. Between 53 and 56, there was an uncertainty of the communist leadership, the international one, the Russian one, the Hungarian one. I don't want to go into the personal details of the Hungarian changes, but one year there was a reformer, the other year the old dogmatist who was like Stalin. So, as according to the classical verse of Lenin, the dominant class was unable to dominate on the old way, on the old method. And the people got this message. And we should remember Austria, 1953, the Austrian neutrality, the Austrian state Staatsvertrag, state consent with Russia, establishing out the Russian army out of Austria, a neutrality for Austria. And for Hungary, which was part of the Austrian Empire for hundreds of years, it was a clear signal. There is a possibility, and we may follow, at least in the mind of the people. We know that the NATO General Secretary at that time, after the revolution, told that it was a collective suicide of the people. But for the Hungarians, it was following the Western way, following back the way of back before the communists, because the communist way for Hungary was brought by the Russian weapons, and this was a clear economic, political and cultural degradation of the country. It's another story that Hungary took its part in the Second World War on the side of the Axis, German, Italian, Japanese alliance, because Hungary lost its territories in the First World War and wanted to get back the territories as the Germans, with the help of the Germans. And that's why Hungary is famous being the last ally of Hitler. And Budapest is famous as being told by Hitler, the fortress Budapest, the last fortress before Germany. The others, the Romanians and other countries, they mastered to get rid of the German alliance, but not the Hungarians for different reasons we are not discussing just right now. So the Austrian model was very important, a Catholic and Christian tradition. Hungary is not as Catholic country as Poland. Poland is almost 100% Catholic country. In Hungary nowadays you have about 6 million Catholics, 2 million Calvinists. This is a huge group in Europe. Switzerland, Netherlands, Hungary, and Romania, being the former Hungarian part, are the biggest Calvinist islands, let's say, of Europe. And we had some 100,000 Lutherans, also Presbyterians in New World. All this Christian tradition was totally suppressed by the communists. It was a very vigorous communist rule, and the national tradition as well, and the democratic tradition as well, and the West orientation. So these were the goals why the revolutionaries started a nationwide uprising. It was based upon Budapest, like the big French Revolution of Paris, but a nationwide and much more, let's say, homogeneous reaction of the countryside, or the whole of the country came up. We know that in France at the 18th century there has been big regions, huge regions which resisted Paris. In Hungary, the Budapest signal was followed. It was first a non-violent fight, and later became a violent fight. I remember high losses had been there. What after? There was a very harsh repression. There's a discussion on the number of people killed, wounded, and property lost. But then from the 60s on, marketization, liberalization, and then Hungary got the label of goulash communism, meaning ox soup communist, people had something to eat. In Poland, simply not. I remember visiting Poland with my parents, Czechoslovakian Poland with my parents, 61. In Poland we had problems with the food. Later on in the 80s, problems with the food, not to speak on cigarettes. I am not drug dependent, but the drug dependent people in the 80s in Poland, meaning no cigarettes. So real scarcity. In Hungary there was a structure of scarcity, but basic welfare, basic food, basic things has been provided. And later on, Kadar dissolved the political police, which was the biggest target of the revolution, because the army and the police, they went to the revolutionaries, because the political police was upset on them. And this police was dissolved. No more kind of leadership. My personal example, I have seen a photograph of Kadar when I was more than 20. That, on the other hand, I was not reading the party newspaper, but just by accident. No dogmatic ideology anymore. This was taken very, very easy. I would say that ideology, of course, not nationwide. You had certain institutions like the army and whatever, still important. But for the population, there was no expectation to go on the streets, marching on and singing and doing things like that, or only in a very, very superficial way. So the life became easier for the Hungarians compared to the other communist countries, where other problems happened. 68, Czechoslovakia, Russian troops again. Then Czechoslovakia from a liberal to a very hardliner and almost totalitarian country back. Romania, internal development, anti-Soviet, but at the same time very, very totalitarian or authoritarian, you may say sultanistic, meaning that Ceausescu family dominating the country. You remember Albania, I don't say anything. Yugoslavia, very liberal, but on the other hand, very much in the hand of Tito, after Tito dissolution, long dissolution. East Germany, always totalitarian, being on the front, the biggest state security apparatus. State security apparatus had been the biggest one compared to population. East Germany, Romania. These were the two countries, and I don't speak on Russia, of course. We will come back to the issue later. And the type of professional management, especially before the Czechoslovakian intervention of the Russians, a type of liberalization of the economy took place in Hungary. Czechoslovakia was stopped by the Russian troops. In Hungary, these reforms went on, experimentation with market economy until the very end. And there was a cautious opening. If we look back now, it is almost nothing. But at that time, it was very important that Hungary asked and could manage with Soviet loyalty membership of the World Bank during the 80s, that the churches got more, let's say, much more space than before. It did not go so far. For example, that the churches could make public appearance. In Poland, in Slovakia, or Czechoslovakia, you had at Easter time big march or the big parade. You have the parade, Buddhist parade, we have the Christian parade on Easter time. In Hungary, it was forbidden. Could not carry out. Outside the church, no church appearance. Church not going into the school. All the orders, monk, nuns, dissolved. Meanwhile, in Czechoslovakia, Poland, all that tolerated. So this was a very secular regime, later a little bit more liberal. But for many people it meant something, that they could go to the church, that it was not endangering their existence. And opening to the West, all that with the loyalty to Moscow. So compared to Poland, Romania, Albania, Yugoslavia, Hungary was a loyal country to Moscow, Kadar being put up by the Soviets. And he realized very well that the revolutionaries lost because they went too far, they wanted to, the exit of the Warsaw Pact, the exit of the system. So we did the system a maximal liberalization. That was the goal of Kadar, and that was not bad, looking on the conditions of that time. This sense we may say that the revolution was a hardliner attempt to leave the bloc, unsuccessful for well-known facts, no allies, no support, Russian dominance. Interesting what the China factor we will listen to, and as far as I, the Hungarian research say, Mao Zedong was at the very end for the intervention with weapons, but we don't know details. Anyway, later on, Kadar, a new attempt maximalizing the freedom within being loyal to the Warsaw Pact, being loyal to the economic integration and to the Soviets until the very last minute. And this policy was quite fruitful until the mid-80s when Gorbachev came up, and for him Kadar was an old guy who was still from the old time, and he wanted new leadership, what he had got later on. But we don't know that details. Let's look a little bit the comparison between the Taiwanese authoritarianism and the Hungarian authoritarianism. The Taiwanese authoritarianism is US bomb. It's a much better ally, I would say, much better supporter than Moscow, because the United States is associated with democracy, with liberals and human rights. Of course, in reality, it is sometimes a little bit not so clear. Taiwan got a militarized character. It was on the front. Hungary and many of the Warsaw Pact members were demilitarized in the sense that the real army was the Soviet army. I remember when I had been a soldier, and once I witnessed it, the march of the Russian tanks compared to Orban. Orban was nothing, and they were real weapons, contemporary weapons. They were not shown to us formally. I was in the guard and I have seen them. I mean, no real military force. Manpower, of course, some guns, of course, but the real military power is Russia. The real state security power is in Russia. The Hungarian state security is only executing what they tell from Russia, and the hard stuff is done by Russia. In Taiwan, you have, especially in the Chiang-Chai-kuo period, a modernization and a very high-level economic growth and welfare. In the communist countries, not only Hungary, the economy of scarcity is there. No real technology development. Why the Soviets allow Hungary to go far? Because they want to get Western technology through Hungary, and they are getting that. If the Westerners allow Hungary to international cooperation, the technologies bought up by Hungary, especially computers, are going further to Russia and other places. Taiwan was home to the ancient Chinese and the modern national tradition against the communist China. The communist Hungary forced internationalists, taboo the issue of the Hungarian minorities in Romania, Slovakia, Yugoslavia, simply was not allowed to speak about, as they would not dare, although every family had relations to them. The Catholic and general church traditions and national traditions were present, big difference. Taiwan had, of course, its region, and Hungary had that region. Let's go further on. What meant the both-sided appraising? Taiwan had in the 40s the 28-2, and Hungary the 23-10. Both failed appraisings had a relevance for the later mobilization of the dissent. These are examples shown that the regime is authoritarian, delegitimizing, demasking the regime, and giving stuff for the intellectual, sometimes exile discourses, overseas Chinese, Hungarian diaspora after 56, hundreds of thousands all over the United States, whatever, different generation of Hungarian exile. They provide arguments why to make a democratic Hungary. And certainly the same or very similar processes are ongoing in the Taiwanese diaspora all over the world, especially in the United States. And these discourses are very important for later democratization. Every political movement needs intellectual movements preceding. This is the external dissent and the internal dissent. So both uprisings have an intellectual impact. How the authoritarian regime react? This is the classical Minister of Truth reaction, or George Orwell. Everything taboo, alternative memory suppressed. In Hungary, it was a very harsh. In case of the leaders of the 56th revolution, their graves did not bear their name. The family knew that they are there somewhere. They were allowed to go there, but others forbidden, meaning political allies, meaning other citizens. The state security kept them, and immediately they took the flowers when the family has gone. So practically non-signed graves for hundreds of people and the core leaders of the revolution. Nothing about practically in the education. I remember when I finished the secondary school, let's say the just and honest history leaders, history teachers, didn't ask contemporary political questions just until the Second World War. Later on, taboo. You do not have that question. It's still unfinished, still in discussion. This respect the anti-communist white terror and the communist red terror were quite similar. And Orwell had that time already, as we know, the experience of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And we have very few documentaries, but if you see it, you may find the Soviet flag and the Nazi flag hissing together. Very few photographs, very few films, but you can find. And he had in mind that all the great power changed their ideologies, changed their position, and they are just following their actual interests, and the past is misused by them according to their actual political interests. This is the message of the Ministry of Truth of Orwell. But in the political culture, the historical consciousness and unconsciousness, these, let's say, problematic issues of former suppressed revolutions, uprisings are there, and in a certain point, like if a mental ill person goes to the psychiater, democratization has a psychiatric event, subconsciousness comes up on societal, cultural level, and also on individual level, which is very interesting. How to struggle with the authoritarian past, how to get rid from manipulation of decades, how to get rid manipulation of decades, new frames, new interpretations, new memorial places, human rights museums, human rights discussions, historical discussions have to come in. I think the best example is former Eastern Germany, because the Germans, after the Second World War in West Germany, they tried a very big cure against the Third Empire, against Hitler fascism, and they thought we are now having the good method for the East Germany after 1989, after reunification, and they try to do their best. If you go to Germany, human rights museums in every town, everywhere, big discussions on the issue, nowhere else. I would say that's the biggest, most extensive and most intensive example. Take example, the present-day state president of Germany. He is Mr. Gauck, and the institution dealing with the formal documents of the state security Stasi, he was the head of, and that's why they called it Gauck, or the Gauck institution, and he became, as a symbol for the emancipation of the East German, the head of the state in the reunified Germany. And now they proposed him a second term, and he does not want to take that. So he's a very established, very much accepted person, both East and both West. Which is an interesting example. We are far away of that in other former post-communist countries, I would say. Different levels, I could go into that, but not in this place. A legal reinterpretation. You are in the middle of the discussions of historical justice, ill-gotten party properties. I think Taiwan, from this point of view, is a very unique thing, because if you compare to Eastern Europe, 89-90, the old communist parties with their properties disappeared, and sometimes we are still searching for the property, especially of the East German party they are searching for. But in the KMT case, you have a dominant party until 2000. I don't know full, but with many properties of the former KMT, used to be the, let's say, the most richest political party according to statistics for a long time. So these discussions have many waves, and of course the different governments have different memorial policy. Just look at your two museums of the 228. The one is a DPP museum, the other one is a KMT museum. In one, Chiang Kai-shek, the last year there, Chiang Kai-shek solving the problems, sending Chiang Chai-kuo to solve the problems and making a a good end of the whole story. In the other one, Chiang Kai-shek is rather the real position in my eyes. In Hungary, we have only one, the so-called House of Terror. I would very much recommend to visit it. It's in the downtown Budapest. This is a historical building because this was the headquarters of the Hungarian Fascist Party first. Then the Communist Party took it for the political police, and there now you have a museum. It's very much debated museum, rather from the center right till top, the governing party before. And there was a long discussion of the leftists whether they should close it, they should remake it, and they left it as it is. I think it's not the best solution. So these are important legitimization and delegitimization processes. They are just ongoing in Taiwan. If you read the newspapers, historical justice with aborigines, ill-gotten party property, you are still in the middle of the discussions. I think in East Central Europe and in Hungary, we have already one generation of that discussion, but I would say I did not expect that after one generation, the generation of my son, these issues are still relevant. I thought they will disappear. It is not true. If you look in the political structure of the post-communist countries, it's very important who has been a party member or a nomenclature member before '89, what families were the beneficiaries and what were the suppressed, which are the religious families and the non-religious families, whether they were moved out from the old property or they could keep their old housing. These are still important political community organizing facts, and political sociology may show it. And I'm afraid that the political structure is able to keep the cleavages. This is the classical thesis of Lipsy and Rogan. Interwar issues will kept frozen, according to their expression, frozen for a long time. And I'm afraid that in the post-communist and post-authoritarian countries, the former conflicts of the suppressor and the suppressed, and especially if it is associated with political organization, if it is associated for pro-US or against US, pro-China or against China orientation, these may be long-term structural principles, new type of privileges. So I think that the Lipsy-Rogan theory has been revised in many ways, for example, by the Green parties, the ecology parties, which produce a new cleavage, not everybody accepts now. The post-communist countries have a type of special cleavage, which is not there. I would say a subculture there. If you have in Europe big communist leftist cultures like France, Italy, Spain, in that subcultures, this is still a cleavage because after '56 started the distance of the Communist Party to the Russia, to the Soviet Union. Anyway, we may discuss the cleavage issue for longer, which I think is a very good thing. Violence, this against the dissent. In Hungary, no violence. Why? Because they want to show a good image to the West. I mean, being member of the World Bank, getting loans, we don't have political trials, political refugees. But the freedom for protest is much less than in Taiwan. We don't have oppositional magazines, you got it already quite early in the 70s. We don't have non-Y, we don't have the non-party participation. In '85, when the communists promised there will be, they canceled in the very last moment. For example, with de facto techniques like this is an electoral meeting, and they set in members of Communist Party that the decent people could not come in the room. Legally they allowed the opposition, but de facto no. It's a big difference if the protector is the US or the United States, also, but US or Soviet Union. No man has omen. This just to change one word, one letter, but I think there's still a difference. At that time there was a big difference. Because before Gorbachev, the hard face of the system was exercised by the Soviet Union directly. The Hungarian state security had not to kill anybody like the Taiwanese did it in the United States, because the Soviets were doing that. So this way, in Taiwan there was much more space for the dissent than in Hungary. Violent incidents are unknown, as told already, and the Helsinki process is a very important thing since the mid-70s, because there was a European agreement of both of East and West, and the Helsinki part was also the human rights issue. Concluding, what does it mean, a protest tradition today, for the constitution, for the political culture? This is an ambivalent issue, because the dissent, in both cases, Hungary and Taiwan, institutionalized in one political party, in the case of Hungary. There are free elections, but unfinished constitutional issues and unfinished, let's say, structure with the past. A new political culture has to be built up for long. I would like to remember you a very clever German sociologist who died, Ralph Dahrendorf. He made a very seminal contribution to the discussion of democratization. He paraphrased the correspondence of the 18th century between Thomas Paine and Edmund Burke. As you know, Thomas Paine had been a British radical who played an important role in the American Revolution. Later he went to France, another story, but I don't tell it. And he criticized Burke because Burke was rejecting the French Revolution. And then Dahrendorf had a correspondence with, I think, Geremek, one of the leading Polish dissent guy, and he was the one. He took the role of Burke, who would like to show structural issues, long-term issues are very important for consolidation. And he has a very famous time span theory. He's saying, everybody refers that, but the other places are also very important in the book. It's a whole book, Letters to My Friend in Poland. It is the new Burke, it is the new reflections on the French Revolution, reflections on the post-communist revolutions. And he say, you can put down the political dominant party in some days or some weeks. You can put up a new constitution in some months. You can put up a new market system in 5, 6, 10 years. But to get a new political culture, and to get a new civil society, then they are not safe. According to my experience in West Germany, you need 60 years. That's he wrote 1989, so the 60 were not yet done when he wrote, since the Second World War. And so he had a very, let's say, like Burke, pessimistic or reduced view against revolutionary optimism and progressive. And I think these long-term discussions in Hungary and Taiwan are very much on pace, because you cannot economize on them. Sometimes it comes up, and I don't know, unfortunately or fortunately, these past, we will never, or very, very long term, just get rid. There was an optimism in '89 that the things of yesterday are past, and we are getting in peace together, in democracy, whatever. But I don't think so that we can economize on these discussions, going into the past and arguing different way and seeing the world. Unfortunately, here blue and green are the colors. In Hungary, red and something orange, maybe. The dual view is a very bad thing. So I think for us social scientists and cultural scientists and citizens, it's important to get, like some, let's say, reform communists called the third way, the other way, not the two sides of the conflict, but other alternatives. I remember very well, I liked it very much, this word of the Hungarian philosopher, when they discussed this house of terror. Should we make a new one, reinterpret it? You should go from room to room and look each and everything there and say your opinion about and discuss and criticize that, but not the whole thing. Avoid it to say white terror, communist terror, whatever. Go on, try to find out, historian, social scientists, the details, where the devil is there, and always we will have a type of political discourse with dual or maybe trial approach, but the social science, cultural science and history should not go in this trap, but to go piece to piece and find out what's the difference between Chiang Kai-shek and Chiang Chih-kuo, what the difference between Chiang Chih-kuo this year and that year, how these people has changed and how their change, which maybe you may say every person before people died, but on the other hand, they may, as Hegel told, the evil can be, and Faust told, Goethe told, evil can be playing an important role in the history. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Szabó's historical bond, elucidation of what has transformed the Bush polity from the ones of the Aryan era to onto the democratic phase. Before we move on to the next speaker, let me offer you a supplementary remarks. I came across some historical elements that in 1919, for 4 months, in Hungary, there was a Soviet regime was established. And for your information, in a similar vein, from 1931 to 1935, there were 4 years. In China, there was a Soviet regime set up in Jiangxi during the Jiangxi era. I found that as a common element imposed by the Soviet in the early nationhood. Seems to play some very interesting role. And yet, what has been described by Professor Szabó, I think more is more powerful. That is globalization, the democratization on the world scale, which imposed on the respective two regimes in a much later era, and yet it has a more enduring impact. I find that is stimulating. Very much grateful for what Professor Szabó has elucidated on the aspect that has been often neglected. I found that is stimulating once again. Appreciate it. Our next speaker, Professor Kagor from Russia, will address on the topic probably also needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a moment. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished scholars, first of all, I'd like to express my deep gratitude for the organizers of this small conference. And when we discussed the plan for this conference with Professor Yuan, Professor Yuan asked me to talk about the rebalancing of relationship between Russia and China, Soviet Union and China. So I will, unlike Professor Szabó, I will concentrate more on international issues, namely the issues between China and Russia. But I'm also very much open to the issues regarding Hungary, because Hungary is not an alien country to me. In fact, I spent in Hungary almost 4 years of my life taken together, and so I would greatly like to participate in discussion about Hungary also too, and of course about Russia. So the title of our conference today is Balancing Social Relationships. So I decided to entitle my short presentation only 4 slides in Chinese. The Russian-Chinese relationship after 1989, balance or imbalance? First of all, I'd like to explain what do I mean here by balance or imbalance. Russia and China are 2 big countries, and they have the longest border in the world. So these 2 countries simply cannot allow themselves to be in confrontation with each other. There was such a period of history. We know this, and it was extremely counterproductive for both sides. And so in today's conditions, Russia and China simply cannot allow themselves to fight each other in forms of Cold War, in forms of hard force. It's unthinkable. So both countries are doomed to cooperate, doomed to deal with each other. But the concrete form, the concrete dynamics of dealing with each other may be pretty different. So what do I mean when I talk about balance? 就是平衡什么意思? By balance, I mean here that countries like Russia and China, they deal with each other, they cooperate with each other, and at the same time they have some kind of trust. They have some, if not trust, but they have some positive expectations from each other. It doesn't mean that they love each other, it doesn't mean that they are going to create a union or something, no, but simply just they deal with each other, they cooperate with each other, and they have some positive expectations from this cooperation. And this is what I call by balance. And by imbalance, or 失衡, I mean such a situation where countries deal with each other. Yes, they have to deal after all, but they somehow distrust each other, and they basically don't have any positive or much positive expectations. So this situation I call 失衡, so imbalance. So please look at the periods of balance and imbalance in relationship between Russia and China. So here right that 1990年后的中俄关系一直在平衡与失衡中徘徊. So in the period after 1989, the relationship between China and Russia were all the time vacillating between balance and imbalance. And here, on the left side, you can see the periods of comparatively speaking balance. The first period was between 1989 and 1991. It was the period of the normalization of the relationship between, at the time, Soviet Union and People's Republic of China. Gorbachev went to Beijing, famous visit, May 1989. He met Deng Xiaoping, and during his talk with Deng Xiaoping, they then pronounced this famous phrase, 接受过去开辟未来, which means just close the past and let us open the future. And there was, again, I stress, it doesn't mean that the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China at the time were in the best relations. No, why not? There was no love. No, there was no passion. But it was at least, they both sides managed to find a balance. 是双方终于找到了一种平衡. But this balance didn't last for long. So we see it here on the right side. This rather short period of balance turned into quite a long 5 years or 6 years period of disbalance or imbalance, which was connected with the collapse of the Soviet Union. I'm very much anti-communist and anti-Soviet, and from the point of my personal convictions, the collapse of the Soviet Union was a good thing, but undeniably it brought about a big global complications, let's say, and during the putsch, the attempt of coup d'etat of oligarch communists in August 1991 in Moscow, Beijing officially, it was very foolish of them, they officially immediately supported this coup band. And after 2 days, this coup band was defeated. And Yeltsin, who was the winner of all this story, he, of course, naturally, he seemed as a person, had a deep distrust with regard to the People's Republic of China. And Beijing at that time was shocked. Well, it was a terrible lose of faith. Just Beijing 丢掉了它的面子。For Beijing, it was a terrible loss of face. This whole story, and not only because of the Soviet Union collapse, but because in this collapse process, Beijing supported their own side and blah blah blah. And Beijing was shocked, and they really hoped that the Communist Party would come back and the Soviet Union in this or that form would be restored. I know this perfectly well. And in fact, the reports made by the Chinese embassy in Moscow at the time were basically in this line. Yeltsin is facing collapse, democracy is facing collapse, the communists are on the rise, economy is collapsing, society is collapsing, so the communists are coming. So they 不是今天的明天，不是明天的就是后天，不是后天的真大后天，他们一定会来。So if not today, then tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then the day after tomorrow, communists will come. So Beijing quite naturally didn't look upon Yeltsin as a legitimate person. They looked upon him as a legitimate the temporary man, temporary leader, and they thought, they were expecting that the Russian economy, after the shock therapy, will collapse. Yeltsin will fall, and communism will just come up the eastern hills once again, so to speak. And only in 1995, the Beijing leaders began accepting Yeltsin as a leader, as a normal man, so to say, normal politician, and at last they threw away their hopes about the restoration of the Soviet Union Communist Party. And then there came another period of comparative balance between the two sides, which lasted from 1996 to 2014. In fact, I tell you one thing. You know, when I work in Russia, I quite often work as an interpreter. Different talks between the Russians and Chinese, and Russians and Taiwanese also. And you know, there was a kind of one may think propagandist wording saying that the current period after 1996 in Russian-Chinese relations is the best period in the history. I think that this is indeed true. If we look at the history of Russian-Chinese relations from 16th century to now, the period between 1996 and 2014 is indeed the best one, from all sides, in all meanings. Well, it's 1996, April. I was exactly at the time in Beijing and in Shanghai, so there was Yeltsin's visit to Shanghai, and the Shanghai communique was passed, and Shanghai International Cooperative Organization was established. And what is the most important at the time was they established this 中俄战略伙伴关系框架. The framework of the relationship, the strategic partnership relations between Russia and China. This is a brilliant invention, because this doesn't demand anything from both sides. It doesn't demand absolutely nothing from both sides, but it somehow gives you the kind of framework of just saving your face, and at the same time to do some good things in the field of cooperation. Why not? But there is no hint at military strategic and geopolitical alliance here. Nothing like that. And when Putin became the president, he was very much West-oriented. He was perceived, in fact, at the time he was a Westernizer, Westerner. And some experts at the time had a viewpoint that the relationship between Beijing and Moscow are just, the strategic cooperation will end. 后半关系就快没了。 it was not true. In fact, at that time I was here in Taiwan in 2000, and in Beijing, I actually come from the university of the conference, and I especially made a presentation on will Russian-Chinese relations should cool down with the new Russian president in power. And my conclusion was that it will not. My conclusion was that Putin will be much more reasonable with regard to China, not like Yeltsin in his last years when he was just embracing Jiang Zemin, saying, we, China and Russia have so many missiles and more than America has. And next morning Putin comes up with such a China, he was a prime minister at the time, saying we were in a good relationship with the United States of America. So Putin, my supposition was that Putin would be more reasonable and rational. And in fact, from 2000 to 2014, he indeed was. He somehow preserved a normal relationship with China, pretty rational, within the framework of the so-called strategic cooperation, but there was no hint at unit of this alliance, and everything what he did was very close to what was perceived in the beginning 1996. But this period of relative balance again changed for the period of imbalance, which started with the Russian intervention into Ukraine and which lasts up till now. 2014 till now, Ukrainian crisis, Russian troops, Russian participation in the crisis, the Western sanctions, and then the oil gas prices went down, and Russian economy went down, and Chinese-Russian trade went down almost 40% in 1 year. So what happened? Yeah, here I say that exactly at the moment when Putin began proclaiming the idea of turning to the east, the new period of imbalance in the relationship between the two countries came. In March 2014, Russian troops marched into Ukraine and annexed the Crimean Peninsula, which, like Transylvania, historically belonged to Hungary. Well, this belonged definitely to Russia, but because of many concrete historical things, this territory, this peninsula became the territory of Ukraine. So, well, this happened, and then in early May, Putin went to Beijing and proclaimed the new period, namely saying that Russia will turn to the east. Россия разворачивается на восток. Russia is turning to the east. Just a little slogan, don't run. But to whom it turns? It turns, of course, to China. And from a certain point of view, this Putin's visit to Beijing was extremely successful, because they signed the long-awaited gas treaty for the power of Siberia pipeline.
那个是西伯利亚。
西伯利亚，是西伯利亚，对不起，西伯利亚，对不起，这英文不对，sorry, I just misspelled one character. But and at that time in the West they began just talking about the alliance between Russia and China, anti-American, blah 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 blah. But in May and June same year in Ukraine, in southern Ukraine, southeastern Ukraine, the war basically started, military conflict, and partly Russian troops participated in it, and anyway, Russian troops, if not participated, they were in the back of those fighters, and by the end of summer there was no prospect for peaceful settlement, in many ways because of the Russian position. And then in August, West introduced financial sanctions against Russia. And well, the Russian economy began falling, not only because of sanctions, but because of many other, including some domestic factors, but altogether the Russian economy was falling. And Russian-Chinese trade fell from 30 to 40% annually. The point is that I think, in fact I talked with many Chinese and Russian experts on the issue, the point is that the degree of confrontation between Russia and the West, especially between Russia and the United States, exceeded the interests of Beijing. Well, some people say that, well, quite rationally, I think that Beijing is interested in kind of contradictions between West and Moscow, but it depends on the degree of these contradictions. Also, Moscow also has some contradictions with the West through the period between 1996 and 2014. But after 2014, there was almost a Cold War. And China had to face the choice who to support, West or Russia. And it looks like that the last 2 years there are signs that Beijing basically decided not to support Russia. But the fact that he doesn't support Russia doesn't mean that he totally embraces the Western position. But it doesn't support Russia. Just Beijing的选择就是至少不支持莫斯科，在规定权内从西方的态度。So Beijing doesn't have big trust with regard to Moscow because Russian political and economic situation is extremely unstable, and it's very difficult to foresee how it will come out, and in fact in the perspective of 1 to 3 years. This is the last slide. So I think that in the future, in the foreseeable future, the Russian-Chinese strategic partnership framework will go on, but its concrete contents, substance, it's very difficult to foresee. In fact, to a certain extent, I would say this, Beijing, one may feel even a compassion towards Beijing, because each time, after 1989, each time Russian-Chinese relations go into the imbalance, it's all because of Russia. Because Russia's situation, just within the recent 20 years, 25 years, it goes like that. 真的是翻天覆地，错综复杂。And for Beijing, it's very difficult to adjust to this Russian change. For Beijing, it's difficult to deal with Russia because they don't understand what's going on there. Well, the Russian-Chinese they lack proper understanding each other, and there are big cultural differences. They have many dreams about each other, or some kind of they imagine each other. Just for Beijing, for example, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the collapse of Soviet communism is still a big issue. And China doesn't look upon Russia, especially now, as a stable partner in all ways. And still, despite all the peculiarities of Russian culture and history, Beijing quite rationally looks upon Russia as a European country, not as an Asian country. And Russian economic and political elite, at least part of it, they look upon China as, they over-exaggerate the achievements of Chinese economic reform. And they somehow expected too much from China. They expected some things which China simply couldn't give to Russia. And of course China cannot substitute West in financial and technological way for Russia. And eventually, as I put it here, after the so-called turning to the east of Russia, both sides, I mean Russia and China, have a kind of a sore throat, so they somehow feel disappointed with each other. And this is my conclusion. Two countries by no means will establish a kind of a military or strategic geopolitical alliance. This is simply out of questions, can't happen. And so this brings me basically to the end of my presentation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much for Professor a couple of very dynamic depiction of what's going on inside and outside the Russia borders. I think this overarching tackling is somewhat inconsistent with the overarching framework that we try to articulate. That is the very nature of the polity, talking about Russia politics, and then the very continuous shifting of the polity, the temperature or the tempo of the polity condition is external relation vis-a-vis that of any foreign states. We're talking about China in particular. So our next speaker, Mr. Shi Yu, who's National Chair Professor here in Taiwan, would address on what his appreciation of the so-called balance of a relationship.
Thank you very much. I have not decided what to say before I come because I intend to listen to the two previous lectures and decide how I can apply or revise my theoretical concerns. I then try to draw theoretical implications from the previous two lectures. My recent endeavor has to do with an alternative international relation theory, which I call balance of relationships, basically concentrating on bilateral relationships, which I think most of international relation theories have even more. Most of them concentrate on multilateral international relations, balance of power, balance of interest. They're talking about how a nation dealing with international society as a whole, whether or not a specific nation is able to comply with the rules of international society, enforce the rules, even sometimes resorting to intervention, or whether or not a nation is able to rationally calculate its level of power and ally with some other countries in order to avoid the expansion of a rising power or a arriving hegemonic power from some other areas. So most of international relation theories care about multilateral relationships, especially between a particular nation state, a national actor, and international society as a whole. And I try to deal with how individual national actors adjust or respond to the entire international relationship. I think in this kind of theorization, we miss the major value of bilateral relationships. I think if there's no bilateral relationship, there's no way that any multilateral rules, either balance of power or balance of interest, can operate. All the countries have to make specific policy towards specific countries in order either to avoid rules of international relations or to enforce rules of international relations. To avoid international rules of international relations because there are specific conditions between specific two countries, so they have to manage that in order for their relationship to continue. Enforcing, of course, we adopt a rule which we believe that it's being accepted by most other countries in the world. So we want to get along with that, and then we enforce it. So I think it's important to look at bilateral relationships in order to understand whether or not a particular rule can be practically enforced or they are actually being avoided in the bilateral frame. However, if we look at most of the there are not very many, but if we look at most of those works working on bilateral relationship in international relation theory. I think predominantly they argue that there's no real pure bilateral relationships per se. All bilateral relationships proceed within a particular multilateral relationality, a multilateral network. So if we look at a bilateral relationship, we must understand first, according to them, how each particular country has situated itself in the multilateral international relations in order to understand how a particular dyadic relationship developed and evolved. And I dispute that. I think their argument is correct to the extent that all bilateral relationships must take place within multilateral context. But I think they're wrong for not looking at the other side of bilateral relationships, aiming at transcending multilateral rules or frame in order for the two particular countries to deal with the relationship according to specific conditions. So the whole reason to have bilateral relationship is not to reflect or reproduce multilateral rules. The whole reason that a particular country interested in developing specific bilateral relationship with another country is because there's something about the multilateral rules that cannot be either enforceable or practically exercised between them. So that's how I look at it. I want to look at a bilateral relationship. I want to bring bilateral relationship back to international relations theorization. And I use the notion of balance of relationships in order to catch the essence or the spirit of bilateral relationship that does not go along with multilateral frame or multilateral rules. And I think it is interesting to look at post-socialist world, or even during the socialist time, how this so-called multilateral socialist analytical help or fail to explain the relationship between two socialist countries. I'm particularly interested in asymmetric relationships between a relatively stronger socialist country and a relatively weaker socialist country, like the one that we heard from Professor Small between Russia and Hungary, or between in my case studies, China and Vietnam, China and North Korea, or if not socialist country, China and Taiwan. If we compare China-Vietnam or Sino-Vietnamese relationship with Russian Hungary relationship, we find something really interesting after I heard what Professor Savoy has talked about. I find interesting thing about how socialism as an identity can be used as a resource, or it cannot be used by either party to resolve their conflict. It depends on whether or not socialism as an identity had become a source of conflict in history. In the Russia-Hungary case, the socialism, the collective identity, becomes a source of legitimacy for the Soviet Union to suppress the uprising in Hungary. But in China and Vietnam relationship, there has not been such use of socialism as a silencing mechanism, as a legitimacy, a source of legitimacy. Rather, socialism has become a source of reconciliation. If we look at China and Vietnam, we realize how socialism has been shelved when there is a conflict between the two countries. However, when the two countries trying to come back and trying to get together and regroup themselves into some sort of a stable relationship, and then we see they use socialism, and they even use specific interactive frame historically established between the two communist parties. So you see the two communist parties come together. If they come together in the capacity of communist leadership, then they come together. And this has to do, I think, with socialism being shelved historically during the confrontation. This is quite different from Russia and Hungary case, where socialism is being used as a silencing mechanism, as a discourse to legitimize suppression. So socialism is no longer being used, it cannot be used. And then you have to look for other discourse, and to get that discourse, then it becomes a suppression of consciousness. There's no way to express, to articulate the taboo that can be accepted by both sides in Hungary, how to proceed with democratization, what discourse they can use, and that discourse can be used to dissolve this sense of embarrassment if you go back to historical cases. And such discourse doesn't seem to exist, and you have to rely on democratization, and then all this discourse on transition, on historical injustice coming back, and that would perhaps in a way discredit all those efforts to reconcile the difference. And in the Russian-China case, and I find socialism being as an ideology is in a kind of a ambivalent condition. On one hand, it reminded people in China, and it's the good old time they had with Russia in the early 50s. On the other hand, socialism seems to create a status problem between China and Russia. Which country should lead socialist movement? Is Russia being the leader and have the legitimacy to request China to adjust, or China also being an equal socialist member in the camp and could choose its own routes or development strategy? And I think socialism has more to do with status conflict. This rather than as an ideology itself become a silencing mechanism. So socialism become somewhat ambivalent, at least in the Chinese attitude towards Russia. If you had chance to meet with people older than 50s, then you see they basically maintain certain romantic feeling toward Stalin, toward Lenin, toward good old times. That had to do with socialism. But then both countries seems to move away a little bit from a socialist institution, except that China is still being ruled by a Communist Party. Socialism doesn't seem to be either very positive or very negative, but then it retains certain romantic elements in the mindset of Chinese population, especially the older generation. In that sense, I see socialism still being a source of trust in China toward Russia today. And if we want to look at policy and how difference or overlapping of interest caused by policy of either side, then you have distrust. So distrust basically comes from policy or leadership. The distrust towards specific policy, distrust towards specific leaders. But then there's no such distrust based on ideological suspicion. There's no such thing between Russia and China, even though one is the socialist country, the other is not. So socialism seems to me is still a way, as a source of trust, at least in China toward Russia. So we have this interesting comparison within the socialist relationship, whether or not socialism can be still used as a balancing instrument for the two countries to restore their relationship, as in the case of Vietnam, or at least unilaterally allowing one side to maintain certain good feeling toward the other, as in the case of China toward Russia, or is it completely useless instrument any longer, as in the case in the process of democratization in Hungary? I think that's what I would like to talk about. I don't have a very clear thought of that, but after having heard the two lectures, and this comes to me, maybe I can use this as a platform of comparison in my future work by bringing how socialism can be used for leverage in the asymmetrical relationship within the larger socialist or post-socialist camp. Thank you.
Thank you for your succinct but still stimulating inputs. All right. Now we're going to do some Q&A interactions from the floor. So, Professor Tang, please.
To Professor Sabo. Yeah. My question is, I agree with you that the case of transitional justice in Taiwan is very much different to that in Hungary. And it is very difficult to make a comparison. I think it is a mistake. It is a misinterpretation by the DPP to make a comparison of the Taiwanese case with the German case. It's totally wrong. Especially our ambassador, our incumbent ambassador to Germany. He's a Germanist. He's a German literature scholar. Xie Zhiwei.
Ambassador
Xie Zhiwei. He's a Germanist. He's a German literature expert. So he has not so much idea on the politics and history and so on in Germany, on Germany. So it makes the impression and the atmosphere that Taiwan or the KMT has done so much damage to the Taiwanese democratization process. It is totally opposite. The Germans, they made catastrophic damage to their nation, but the KMT is totally different. By that time in the 90s, we are rich, we were rich, yeah, by that time. Yeah, most of the people, they agree. But afterwards, things changed. Yeah, that's the first point I want to make. And secondly, my question is, do you think that Hungary is now a democratic country? Concerning the rows between the Hungary and the European Union, there are certain phenomena that the European Union has criticized very harshly on Hungary, because you have two-thirds majority in parliament, almost the same as the situation in Taiwan. So there are certain developments that do not meet the requirements of the European Union. And what's your opinion on this? Yeah, this is my question. And to Michel, 你说这个 balance and imbalance. Imbalance means bad or what? Or too good. Too good can be also imbalance. Oh, that's why I don't actually catch up with your mind. Meaning imbalance. For instance, the current situation since 2014. Yeah, both sides are 难兄难弟. What do you say? It's brotherhood in trouble. Yeah, both sides are more or less in trouble. Yeah, so they stick together. And you think it's imbalanced or it's better than balance? Yeah, this is my first question. And secondly, the Sino-Russian relationship, the whole phrase is 中俄全面性战略协作伙伴关系 the comprehensive, cooperative, and 协作 I don't know how to translate 协作 coordinate or coordinate 可是这个 coordinate is different as cooperative 因为 coordinate means trade in arms 中共跟其他的国家 with other countries they have all mostly cooperative comprehensive cooperative relationship because with Russia it's coordinate also I want to pick up the differences between China and Sino-Russian relationship because we have arms trade because of the arms embargo from EU and the United States it is extremely difficult for China to get the military procurements. Yeah? So Russia is the only source or out of China source for China. Yeah? So this is my question. Otherwise, I agree with you all what you have stated, but in the perspective, I would say that Eastern Siberia and Central Asia could be two problematic spots for the China and the Russian relationship. Because in these two areas, you have competitive, or you have competition between the two sides. Yeah? Eastern Siberia is very much for China. I mean, in their trade and their relationship with Russia, yeah? And also in Central Asia. China is much in a position to invest in these areas than the Russians. And you mentioned the decrease of the Sino-Russian trade for 40%. There's many reasons for that. Because the devaluation of the ruble, yeah, local currency is one of the, yeah, and also the decrease of the oil prices, yeah, all over in the world, yeah. So that's why. And for the bilateral trade between China and Russia, it is also very interesting. What do you sell to China? Only certain items. But what does China sell to you? It's variety. Yeah, this is, I would say this is a very imbalanced trade between the two sides. You sell to China only resources and military equipment, both. Yeah? These are the major content of the export from Russia to China. But from China to Russia, many variety of merchandise. Yeah. And 老哥啊，我佩服你啊，这个 very good， 这个双边跟多边啊，那么 bilateral 跟这个 multilateral，I agree， 这个非常好啊，这样 very good。可是就是 the comparison between Russia and Hungary and China with Vietnam is a little bit problematic because you have a treaty at that time, Warsaw Pact and so on. Yeah. So the Soviets were dominant in this at that time, the Cold War era. Yeah. Yeah. equal community, but they are more equal. There are some more equals. Yeah. So this because you have a treaty, at least you have a treaty. Yeah. But China had no treaty with Vietnam. No treaties. No nothing. Actually, they had very amicable relationship between. I mean, during the Vietnam War against the United States. But after that, things have been changed because of the Soviet Union. You know? Because Vietnam tried to associate with Soviet Union. It angers China, angers Beijing a lot. And that's why the invasion in 78, 79 at that time. Yeah. So that's why I would say this comparison is a little bit problematic for me. Yeah. Okay.
And the Second World War treaties. The Second World War treaties put Eastern Europe to the Russians.
World War II.
The Second World War,
World
both
War.
treaties, and not Vietnam.
Yeah.
Vietnam was not there.
Vietnam.
The Russians felt they had the right of Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
All right. Yes.
This doctrine from 68.
Well, gentlemen, please respond to Professor Tang's first round question.
Thank you for your questions and for all the discussion. Germany. I mean, ich sage jetzt Deutsch. Am deutsches Wesen soll das Welt genesen. On German spirit should the word stand. Very rough translation. Told sometime. And I lived in Germany before and after unification, and there is a type of Protestant mission consciousness, like Gauck as president. Protestant, German, just, we did well with the Third Empire, we will much better do with the communists. Is it a model? I don't know. I don't know, because one thing, the East German state was over.
Yeah.
The state was over, no sovereign state anymore. No secret, everything you get, all except what in Russia. All you have still there. You can read, you can find. There are no state secrets. In any other countries, there is still a sovereign state. There are secrets, there are limits of the alignment to the state security, what communist has done, whatever. So this way, very problematic. You may take Germany as a model, but not implement, but think about. And you have an argument in Taiwan. I was very much surprised when last year I was guest professor for human rights at the Social University. I expected you have an American law system, and you have a German base through the Japanese. And when we discussed with the students sunflower movement, civil disobedience, the discussion of West Germany from the 80s came up through legal scholars of your country, leading legal scholars of your country. So you have a German-based legal, partly German-based legal culture, which is very interesting, very exceptional in Asia, I think. And this connection, German political culture, thinking, law, historical justice, is not just an issue of a person who is a German. It's an issue of your legal political culture, which is very much interesting, but I don't go in details. And so far the TPP. Hungary, if Hungary is a democracy, I brought to Professor Yuan, who has a beautiful library, you'll never have seen, you should, a new book, The Hungarian Patient. I was also a humble contributor. Social opposition to an illiberal democracy. Illiberal democracy. Fares Zakaria, we remember all. Democracy has many types. Europe and democracy, that's another interesting question. I tried to make clear to my students last year, which became in the reality a bigger schism by the refugees, that the European legal system has the concept of the fundamental rights. What does it mean? The rights of the European citizens and you have the human rights of the UN, the rights of each and every global citizen, every person on the world, personalized human rights for everybody, not the same, different levels. In the refugee issues, very, very clear in this dramatic situation since 1 year. When I came back from Taiwan last year, then we got the refugee crisis. But for me, it was, as former ombudsman of the Hungary, it was a little bit earlier clear. When you have the Hungarian or any EU countries report at the UN, report the human rights balance in 5 years, each and every non-European countries, or most of them, criticizing Europe as not fulfilling the UN refugee principles. Because in that you have a refugee has a right to bring the whole family to the country which accepts. All Black African, all Latin American, on each and every welfare country, they put it this and other. There is a difference between the fundamental rights and the human rights. What is the EU? What political community is an EU which rejected its own constitution about 10 years ago? Nobody speaks about nowadays, but I think the problem with the EU EU as a legal community started at that time, or earlier. We have two human rights courts of Europe, the Strasbourg Court and the Luxembourg Court. And it failed last year to get them together. And it is still huge problems to get them together. Because as far as you bring together the European Human Rights Court and the European EU Court, which is based also on commercial and economic law, that's an immense task, which is not solved yet, not just because the European lawyers are so dull, but this is a structural difference. And I think does the European Union have a constitutional court? No. What is the legitimation of the European Union to criticize the functioning of the Polish constitutional court at the moment? A political community not having an institution, criticizing a member state who is having the institution, how does it function? Without a constitution of Europe itself. So this type of European human rights criticism on Hungary, any other country like Poland, or any member state before Italy, Berlusconi time, before Austria, Haider time, the extreme right, or two-thirds is there, and center right. What do they have to do with the internal majorities and minorities? Two-thirds, what's the problem? I mean, this is much more complex to see that the European Union is equal with a type of European democracy, and this is a value to put on a nation state's internal issues. Despite of the fact, I think the Hungarian democracy is very much problematic, and other post-communist democracies are also very much problematic, but the EU discussion, the EU criticism sometimes is totally failed, lacking legitimacy, lacking background. Your conception of, Professor Schick, bilateral and multilateral is also very interesting if we think on the EU. And what we have this type of mezzo subsystems. We have the communist system, which is more or less over. We have the Islamic states, the Islam as a community. They try to get unified state in Northern Africa, for example. We have the EU. How to measure them on the global UN system? That's a very interesting question. Bilateral, multilateral, and relation to global. We don't have anything better than the UN at the moment. I have been not representing Hungary, but being many times for Hungary as an ombudsman at the human rights issues in the UN. And what remained for me on the UN is that at least a global forum. At least a global forum. States are accepting. It's another story that non-states are more and more there. This is a problem for the UN. not unproblematic, but only thing which put up a measure with the human rights catalog. The EU is failing that criteria. The EU is failing that criteria, the communist system failed that criteria, and the Islamic communities are failing that criteria.
Okay, last question. Are you in favor of the refugee policy from your government? Yes or no? Or
It's so simple, yes or no question. What's that?
I don't know.
I'm in favor of the KMT or the DPPs. What I finished on the end of my contribution was, please forget the dichotomy conceptions. Yes or no's and blue and green. Let's think a little bit more sophisticatedly in the social sciences. How to measure the Hungarian refugee policy? On the refugee policy of the EU, does it have it? Today, yesterday, day before yesterday. What's the refugee policy of the EU? Was the refugee policy of the EU ever made? I was until 2013 in the European Parliament at different EU human rights institutions very often. And you could realize very well at the European Parliament, they do not have at all a refugee policy. The leftists are just speaking orally and they would accept everybody. And the great Swedish, what they had as a conception, the harpoon, you know, that you are a fishing nation, what a harpoon is. You put in the fish and you put it in your net. And the idea is that the Swedish harpoon was, you put on the refugee the harpoon and you put it back. But how? In between huge amount of money. That was before the refugee issue. And no Sweden is closing up. How to measure an individual country's refugee policy? Very interesting and complex question. And there are different measures. The EU is already out of the UN consent. Is there a UN consent? Is there a consent between Russia, China, the so-called third world or poor countries in Europe? No. I don't think so that we have an eternal measure. We have very, very, very different measures. It's very, very complex. And many people saying in Europe know that Hungary started a policy which they are following now of the closure. And then what's to think about human rights and how far human rights are in working in a real environment, because the human rights as such are utopias. And there is always a balance, which is the main issue of this conference, in between the reality and the utopia. And obviously, this huge amount of refugees made up a very huge distance in between the human rights idea and the reality in the EU, in each and every country, and in Hungary also. That's my answer.
Yes.
Dear Professor Bohr, thank you very much for the questions. I'll try to be as concise and short as possible. What is good about balance or imbalance? Well, my point of departure was that balance is good in principle and imbalance is bad. Sino-Russian relationship, coordinated an arms trade. Well, Russia does have an arms trade with China, which is absolutely true. But Russia also has quite a big arms trade with potential rivals of China, like India or Vietnam. So, well, the fact that we sell arms to China itself is nothing special, because Russia trades arms in Asia quite actively, not only to China but also to India, to potential rivals of China. Then the next point you made, and perhaps I will express my personal view. Okay, in fact, one of the more important points in my presentation was that I don't see that Russia and China are now sticking to each other. I see quite a different process, in fact, that, well, it's a long story. It's really a long story. I have no time to elaborate on that. I can elaborate. In fact, the article you got from me just, is about that. So, in fact, Russia plays too much hopes in China, not understanding what China indeed can do and wants to do. In fact, in many ways, Russian position, I know this personally because I've talked to many people in Russia, Russian position in some ways was indeed ridiculous. They were expecting something from China that China simply cannot give and will not give. In fact, and China was very much reluctant. There was a very good saying that the Russian-Chinese relations is very warm on the upper level and very cold on the lower level. The thing is that when the financial sanctions were introduced in Russia, and Russia indeed tried to face China with just thinking that maybe China may help. Even in March 2015, one of the Russian deputy prime ministers, Dvorkovich, he said that we invite Chinese companies to invest in Russia to be the the holders of the Russian companies. With even some strategic Russian companies, but the Chinese didn't come, and the power of Siberia, this pipeline, the strength of Siberia, the Chinese, Putin and Xi Jinping personally, they agreed on just the issue, and the Chinese promised 2,002 billion US dollars prepayment, 支付. But up till now they didn't do anything. They didn't give Russia even a cent. There is much talk, blah blah blah, but the Chinese playing its role indeed. But I don't think that, I don't see this person on the ground, from the ground. I don't see that the countries are sticking to each other. That's why I call the situation imbalanced, because China is not trusting Russia. They do not know what will happen in Russia in a couple of years. Russia is also somehow dissatisfied, is the ruling elites in Russia, they're dissatisfied with China in many ways. So there is still a big misbalance or imbalance, which I don't know whether it's good or bad, but I mean this is a problem. This is a problem for the bilateral relations. This is a problem. The relations are problematic. Central Asia and Eastern Siberia. Central Asia is not a part of Russia, and Eastern Siberia is a part of Russia. So Central Asia is, this is something very much different. Central Asia, well, I think that Russia and China may be quite big rivals in Central Asia, but Russia is losing to China in many ways. What China is getting, that's another story again. But Russia, again, it's not necessarily bad for Russia to lose Central Asia, it's not necessarily good for China to get Central Asia. It's a long story. But Russia is indeed on retreat, China is on offensive in Central Asia economically. I mean, Eastern Siberia is a part of Russia. Well, I know there was much talk about that, that Chinese are just invading and so on and so forth. Neither democratic, I say it with total responsibility, what I'm saying is not propaganda or blah blah blah. I'm saying it with total responsibility that neither demographic figures nor economic figures, investment figures, for example, testify to the fact that there is a kind of Chinese invasion in East Siberia. No, it doesn't exist now, currently. The Chinese are interested in Siberian oil, for example, maybe Siberian timber, but it doesn't mean at all that they're prepared to go there and just to do something like many people think. Now, so far, this phenomenon doesn't exist. I say it totally seriously. If it would have existed, I would say it exists. It doesn't exist. So I think that Eastern Siberia, from this point, is to be looked upon as a part of Russia, and I've told you that China has very big reservations with regard to indeed cooperating with Russia currently. Trade imbalance, this is a great problem. You are totally right. There's a big trade imbalance, but the point is that with this trade imbalance and with the given structure of the economies of the two countries and the given scale of the economies of the two countries, it's very difficult to rise our trade amount. It's very difficult to raise it because in order to raise it, we Russians must sell to China something more than simply timber or oil, and China must, I beg your pardon, upgrade the quality of the goods which it sells to Russia. But both countries somehow, both economies somehow now, up till now, are not in capability of doing this, in doing such restructuring. So I think that Russian trade balance, even before Ukrainian crisis and the just fall of oil prices, it began stagnating. It began stagnating from 2011 approximately. So this is all. Thank you.
Back to Professor Shi.
I don't have a lot to say. I think it is good to incorporate the notion of treaty relationship. I think if we involve treaty relationship as socialist identity in bilateral relationship, then basically that explains why socialism has lost credit, because it has been used as a silencing mechanism. But in China and Vietnam, there is no such resort ideological use of socialism when they compete or rival each other. So socialism can remain useful in the future for them to come together. So I think that's the only thing I have to say.
Chairman, would you like to address what Professor Shi's first round of comments or presentation on his treatment of the socialism as ideology, as identity?
I mean, the Hungarian case is a special case, as well as of Czechoslovakia, 68, and Poland, because these three countries wanted to have an exit. They wanted to leave, let's say, the community, which was partly really based upon valid legal principles. But there was no, we know very well, there was no paragraph for intervention. There was no paragraph for intervention, but there was no paragraph for leaving. That's the typical communist law trend, the communist law trend.
Brezhnev doctrine.
Yeah, it's a doctrine,
Yeah.
but it's a political doctrine, but not an international law or multilateral law, something. But you may say this is a typical solution of the communist law in Hungary, at least. You say we have the freedom of protest or demonstration, but we do not have any paragraph about that, how is it functioning, and de facto we fight that with police or with army. So this is a very typical, believe it, there is a hole in the legal or in the treaty structure on the exit. People would like to try, or they declare the exit, meaning they declare, believe the Warsaw Pact, which is the military organization, and then the Warsaw Pact armies invade. This is the Brezhnev doctrine, but used to be, but it was it did not have any legal, even no communist or socialist legal background. So this way, it shows that the communist law, the Soviet communist law, wanted to have the general legal principles to be realized. If there was a constitution, there was international law, there was commercial law, based upon the basic principles of the civil laws and international laws of the world, but left these holes and they treated it with politics. So law was just a servant of the politics. I would say if there would have been a complete legal community, then it would work. Because the EU, what do they have for the exit? They have just political solution. A Juncker doctrine is based upon now, without hopefully military, based upon the Brexit. So you see it's how interesting. You build up these regional, legal international communities who do not allow the exit de facto. In this sense, the Warsaw Pact and the EU has similar character from the legal point of view.
Well, I think that Professor Sarko is totally right. I'll put it just a different way. Hungary was occupied by the Soviet Union, in fact. And China was not occupied by the Soviet Union. And China was not occupied by the Soviet Union. No, anyway, in Hungary, Hungary was directly occupied, like other European countries, and Russian, Soviet, better to say, Soviet administration had all leverage just to do what they want. While in China, the story was a bit different. The story was a bit different. China was not, in this sense, occupied by the Soviet Union. Chinese communism was to a great extent homegrown. And Mao Zedong there was some kind of support from the Soviet Union. Anyway, the degree of Soviet involvement in the Chinese socialist case is incomparable with to an extent Soviet Union was involved in Hungary. Because Hungary is small, China is great, so it's still the size matters also in that. So I think that for Hungary, socialism was absolutely imposed on Hungary, while for China, the Soviet Union or Russia, socialism was much more a homegrown thing. And while, for example, I know this from my personal experience, I would never come and talk with Professor Sapor about how it was good just for our time, in the Soviet Union, the People's Republic of Hungary. This is nonsense. This is idiocy. Because Professor Sapor, I disagree with this also. I mean, I'm an anti-Soviet, anti-communist, but Professor Sapor may say to me, well, I'm crazy. You occupied us. You did anything, something terrible bad with us. So what kind of goodness are you talking about? While in China is different. It's quite Chinese themselves. They usually say that, wow, 就是苏联老的苏联这个中50年代蜜月。The Soviet Union, the older brother, 1950s or blah blah blah. Well, clearly there are some positive feelings in China with regard to the Soviet Union in the 1950s, and clearly there are not at all positive feelings towards the Soviet Union in Hungary or any other East European countries with regard to the Soviet Union. It's clear why. So I think that to a certain extent, to the extent of the communists being homegrown in Soviet Union and China, this may be looked upon, this spectrum may be looked upon as a kind of something joint, yes. But this time is already also passing, and the generation in China and in Russia, of course, the generation of the people who just had these personal experiences gone or is going out, and so I think that the longer, in the foreseeable future, this spectrum will cease to exist.
Right. I'll leave you gentlemen to eat. Actually, go ahead. I preempt in purpose on the very remarks you made. I disagree.
You disagree?
I disagree with the general convention wisdom as to depict that the revolution from abroad and vis-a-vis revolution from home. But the Chinese model versus the rest of the communist socialist model. I point out there were 4 years, 31 to 35, in Jiangxi. That was exactly the Soviet imposition of the so-called system. Let us not forget that part of transformation. People tend to forget. Being a student of Chinese history, I'm very faithful what has been, already exists.
But no Soviet troops.
But the very impulse that was, transcended from Moscow, coming down, therefore, they even used the Soviet
Yeah, you mean the 苏维埃运动 Soviet, okay, so
Exactly.
here, yeah.
They used the term Soviet. They did not use Chinese at all. Right? Well, Hungary was lucky. It lasted for 4 months only in 1919. It failed. But it existed in China, in Jiangxi, in one particular province of China. They were in experimental something, you know, export to China. That is alien, you know. That's why the very, very overarching, the socialist, the term that we use.
Within liberal, also an alien ideology.
It is. It is.
What about nationalism? Nationalism.
Right. So I think there's no shortage of dispute. There's no shortage of disagreement. However, one has to be faithful about the history. I think the historical facts are facts that the political scientists has to deal with.
And we have different specs for these facts. We have different specs, different view.
It is, but those are facts. And another notes.
How we are able to sense any fact without or this Immanuel Kant told us. It's not possible, unfortunately, neither in ontology, nor in aesthetics, nor in morality.
Right. Those
There
are
is no kingdom see. There are no facts. We see the world and this is seen. Why are there colors? Human problem.
right. And also you mentioned about the German legal influence on China to be mainland China. I think a continental legal influence. No. That there's a contour of this. Especially the civil law actually were import indirectly from Japan. Okay? Because Japan learned from the continental German first. Yes, there is a deep-rooted civil law in a sense. But for your information, that what the current government's learning from the German dealing with the East German issues. As we speak, Professor Tang pointed out that they learned from the German case to deal with the KMT. All right, so this is something very intriguing. I found that as a gap, geographical gap and a conceptual gap somehow. But Professor Tang addressed the issue that West German deal with the East German once Germany is unified, and yet the DDP borrow heavily from the German dealing with the former communist regime to deal with the KMT issue. That is intriguing. However, that's a reality. That's exactly happening. So we have to take into account the very usefulness or irrelevance, whatever. That's politics.
That's authoritarian.
But if you have dichotomic structures, dichotomic structures, dichotomic like East and West, blue and green, no compromise, no consent on certain basic issues, then you have...
Not yet.
Well, I hope you will get it. We didn't get either, between left and right in Hungary. We are also correct. Getting involved more and more in Taiwan, I see more and more similarities to Hungary.
That's true. I found your comparison stimulating. For the sake of the discussion, I'd like also collect a question from the floor. Anyone would like to address?
I wanted to I hope you understand me in the right way. I do not deny, I totally agree with you, because the Comintern involvement in the Chinese story was very deep and big, it's truth. And in this sense, I think that Soviet Union helped Chinese communists, and undeniably, Soviet Union 就是蒋中正也写了这本书，苏俄在中国。Chiang Kai-shek wrote this book, Soviet Russia in China, and I've read this book, in fact in Chinese and in Russian. So I totally agree with the main argument, in fact, of the book. But still, I want you to understand it in the right way, that there are still differences between Hungary and China. And I mean, the role of the Soviet Union in commentary with regard to China and with regard to Hungary. And also the events of the Second World War are important, and well, the size is also important. And besides, I think that the communist movement in China, although supported undeniably by the Soviet Union, still was much stronger than in Hungary.
That's right, that's right.
That's right.
Are you suggesting the Chinese are prone to communism vis-a-vis that of Hungary?
No.
No,
I don't think so. No, I'm not suggesting this definitely. I do not know. Are Russians prone to communism? I beg your pardon? Although communism was somehow born in this country. I think that communism is a thing which comes up when there is a deep crisis in a certain society. And I think, or like it was in Russia, like it was in mainland China, with Hungary turned out, I beg your pardon, Professor Saber, and our Hungarian friends and colleagues, but somehow Hungary was not lucky enough in this case, in many ways. Hungary was not lucky, and Hungary was just, it turned out to be just simply given to the Stalinist Soviet Union. While China, well, it's not, again, I say, the role of the Soviet Union commentary in China is undeniable, but it's different from the Hungarian story. And I think that no nation is prone to communism, just the way no nation is prone to fascism or Nazism. Although the Nazism and Nazis and communists are almost in every nation also. So it depends on the structure and degree of crisis when such guys may come to power. Nobody is prone. No, Chinese are definitely not prone to communism at all, like Russia now, like Hungarian now.
Probably the liberalism is not something that foreign nations.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. I would like to collect questions from the floor. Yes. Do you have comments from the practitioners? Different students? Any questions? Yes. Those are students from. Okay. Ask the question.
I'm a graduate student of NCCU, and I studied honors, the International Master Program of Asia Pacific Studies.
I see.
And my name is Caroline. Nice to meet you. And it's my pleasure to attend this seminar. And all the professors are very professional and very educated as the country inside of
Where are you from?
I'm from Taiwan.
Taiwan.
Yeah? Nice to meet you.
Do you have a question for any professor?
Maybe later.
Better now. They are leaving. 吃饱了吗？So the journey, this intellectual journey has ended.
Never ever.
Never ends. But Professor Shi informed me that he had known two other Professor Zavol in the past.
There are so many. What about chance?
So it's a very popular name, right?
Like chance.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, so much.
Yeah.
So it must be a big family.
No, not at all. Just name, just name.
I see.
Nothing else.
So what we have discussed so far, let me summarize in 30 seconds. We have discussed on many levels. On the foundational level, that's the nature of a polity. We cover on the transformation of a polity at one stage to the next one. And also we discuss on the substantive, specific domain of policy. So that's this a line of inquiry for our discussion. Our speaker tried to articulate it and explore its very substantive implications of whatever issue involved, whether it's external or internal. I found that it's important and essential for not only for a student of political science, the student of international relations, it should also be substantiated by the history. Social sciences are pretty much good at summarize it, and yet one has to also judge in accordance with its historical evolution and the ongoing dialogue across borders. I think thanks to internet and also thanks to frequent visiting international scholar, you guys always enrich our understanding of really going on, not only for professors and also for students. I really appreciated your input today and looking forward to